But you proposed a bill this week focusing on IVF and this fight that we've seen play out since what happened in my home state of Alabama. This bill would essentially make states ineligible to receive Medicaid funding if they banned IVF in their state. Some may look at that and say, you know, why not go one step further and just protect and create a federal protection for IVF access?
Well, that's exactly what this bill does. It provides a categorical protection for IVF. And the reason I did it is, number one, I strongly support IVF. I think IVF is an incredible technology. I mean, it has given millions of parents hope who couldn't otherwise have children. You know, the statistics are amazing. 2% of all births in America come from IVF. There are over 8 million babies that have been born through IVF. And you look at the state of things right now, I think there are a lot of people who are confused and scared that they feel that IVF is in jeopardy. And following the Alabama Supreme Court decision, a lot of people were very worried about that. In the Senate, to the best of my knowledge, all 100 senators support IVF. I'm not aware of a single senator who doesn't. And so what happened, I approached Katie Britt, the senator from Alabama, and I said, look, let's team up and let's draft a very simple bill that creates strong federal protections that makes clear no state can ban IVF, and that's what we did. We made it as a condition of Medicaid funding. That's a frequent method of imposing a federal restriction on the states. It's long upheld in the courts.
But I'm curious about that because, I mean, your home state of Texas, my home state of Alabama, they're not seeking to ever expand Medicaid funding. It's more of a punishment. So it's kind of tied to that. So they could still technically ban IVF. They just wouldn't be able to receive Medicaid funding if they did.
But as a practical matter, no one is going to turn down billions of dollars in Medicaid funds. You know, it's a method, for example, it's how Congress used highway funds to get states to raise the drinking age to 21. And it was the same thing. It was a condition. You don't get your highway funds unless you raise the age, and they did so. It's how Congress, you go back in the 70s, used highway funds also to lower the speed limit to 55. They ended up allowing it to raise again. But if you look at congressional authority, the spending clause is a component of the Constitution that Congress has unquestioned authority to attach conditions to federal spending. And so we attached it to Medicaid. There is no state in the union that's going to turn down the massive amount of money from Medicaid. And so it operates as a clear federal protection, an ironclad protection that no state and no local government can ban IVF.
Yeah, but in Alabama, you know, they didn't ban IVF. The Supreme Court just came out there, ruled that essentially embryos count as children. And that was why you saw there's not that many IVF clinics. A lot of them closed down out of fear of what the legal landscape was there. If there was a federal law protecting access to IVF, that wouldn't have happened.
Well, that's right, and that's why I think we should pass a federal law. And I think it's notable when the Alabama Supreme Court decision came down that the Alabama legislature came in very quickly, within weeks, and passed a law.
Which you don't often see from them.
You don't often, and they move quickly to make clear IVF is fully protected in Alabama. And that's true in all 50 states. That I'm not aware, I literally don't know of a state legislator in any state that wants to ban IVF, but I want to take the fear off the table because people are afraid, and I understand, and you're right, in Alabama, following the Supreme Court decisions, the clinics there halted their treatments. And that's fundamentally wrong. And that's why I said, look, part of it is we're seeing a lot of fear-mongering. We're seeing people for political reasons that are trying to scare voters and say...
So I've heard you say that, which is interesting, because in Alabama, that wasn't what I saw up close. I mean, I know these people. It was that they were worried that they were going to be prosecuted if there was a mishap and an accident in a facility like in Alabama. It wasn't fear-mongering out of the media. It was people in the state were worried that they would be prosecuted.
Well, and let me be clear, the fear-mongering is all across the country. But look, I understand why the IVF clinics, that they were uncertain what to do in Alabama, and they halted temporarily. And I'm really glad the Alabama legislature came in and said, no, you guys are fine. This is important. I think IVF is incredibly important. And where the fear-mongering is happening is in the other 49 states. And you have, frankly, Democrats who are fairly cynically trying to scare voters and say the mean Republicans want to take away IVF, and that's not true.
I'm glad you brought that up because the reason that premise is out there is because of what's happened with abortion and what we've seen happen in states like your state of Texas where, you know, almost all abortions are banned. There's no exceptions for rape or incest in the state of Texas. And you know, they only have a pretty narrow exception if the health and the life of the mother is at risk. That didn't apply to Kate Cox. Everyone knows her story. Did you support that Supreme Court ruling from your state preventing Kate Cox from getting an abortion?
Look, what happened to Kate Cox was horrific. And she was a mom who had kids, who wanted to have another child, and discovered that her unborn child had a fatal disease that would kill her child. And that is a horrific situation. As you noted, the Texas law has an exception in it for a birth that would do serious damage to a critical life functioning of the mother. And what the Texas Supreme Court concluded, I think there's a very good argument that she fell under that exception. But what the Texas Supreme Court said in its opinion is it asked the Texas Medical Board, go in and set clear rules, because the Texas Supreme Court said, look, under this law, it's doctors that should be making this determination. It shouldn't be courts. It shouldn't be lawyers. It should be.
So do you disagree with the ruling?
I think the Texas Supreme Court was right in saying that the Texas Medical Board should set the rules. And listen, there's a big difference between abortion and IVF.
The medical board doesn't make the law. I mean,
well, but it clarifies the standards, and the Texas Supreme Court unanimously called on the medical board to clarify the standards because doctors were uncertain. And
that feels like it's deflecting from the lawmakers in the state to the doctors to have to decide.
Well, no, it's actually empowering the doctors because there's a medical board there for a reason. And listen, there's an enormous difference between abortion and IVF. On abortion is an issue that people are hotly divided, that there's a real division of opinion. And people of good faith can disagree on that and can disagree passionately and emotionally. And what the Supreme Court said in returning this to the states is under our Constitution, the way we resolve issues that there are strong disagreements is through the electoral process. And what that means is the voters in Texas decide the Texas laws.
Yeah, you believe it's a state's issue for abortion or for IVF, but not for abortion?
I think what the court has said is abortion is an issue the states can decide because Texas is going to adopt very different laws than New York. And of course, they should. IVF is different because the overwhelming majority of Americans strongly support IVF. 84% of Americans want to see it protected
as you know,
in law.
A lot of Americans support abortion rights as well. We'll see, of course, how that plays out in November. But I do want to ask you about the Supreme Court. You clerked there, and Supreme Court Justice Alito has been in the news for what happened recently where he was flying an upside-down flag at his home. He says it was his wife who did it. But, of course, it was right after January 6th. That was a symbol of Stop the Steal. Do you think that was inappropriate?
Look, I think this entire hoopla is greatly overstated. And I think there is a concerted effort that is driven by Democrats in the Senate to try to delegitimize the court and to try to demonize. We're seeing it with Justice Clarence Thomas. We're seeing it with Justice Sam Alito. I think the whole thing is disgraceful. In my view, Sam Alito is an extraordinary justice. Clarence Thomas is an extraordinary justice. I know both of them very, very well. And this has been, if you look at from the far left, the court is the one institution that they do not control. And we saw Chuck Schumer go to the steps of the Supreme Court and threaten the justices and say, if you do not vote the way I want you to vote in the Dobbs decision, he said, you will unleash the whirlwind. And he threatened them by name.
But on the flag itself, are you okay with him flying an upside-down flag outside his home?
Well, listen, Justice Alito's explanation is that his wife, that he had a neighbor in Maryland who was apparently a vicious partisan, who had a sign in his front yard that said F Donald Trump, which is pretty nasty in a neighborhood.
But the neighbor is not a Supreme Court justice.
No, but the neighbor also screamed and cursed at Justice Alito's wife and apparently called her the C word, which I'm sorry is repulsive. Listen, there are justices I disagree with, and yet you should treat everyone with civility and respect. And what Justice Alito said is his wife was upset. And let's be honest, if you had a neighbor screaming and cursing and insulting you...
I think neighborly disputes, probably a lot of people watching can understand that. But he is a sitting Supreme Court justice, and they're about to make key decisions about January 6th. Two of them, they're related to that. Do you not worry that it undercuts his credibility as a justice when he does something like this? Number
one, he said he didn't have anything to do with it, that it was his wife who did it. But number two, this is all about trying to delegitimize the court. The Democrats, almost every Democrat in the Senate, if they win, they want to pack the Supreme Court. They want to grow the Supreme Court from 9 justices to 13 justices. The reason they want to do that is they want to add 4 left-wing justices immediately. And I got to say, it is unfortunate.
I'll tell you, President Biden, of course, doesn't agree with that.
No, he said he does. No, he has said he would support packing the court. He did not resist that.
They would have to get rid of the filibuster. I mean, that's not going to happen.
Well, and I'll tell you what, if the Democrats gain 1 seat in the Senate. Chuck Schumer has 49 votes to end the filibuster. If he got one more, he would end the filibuster and they would pack the court.
I want to talk about what's happening in the Senate. We have a lot more questions for you, Senator Ted Cruz. I hope you'll stick around. We're going to take a quick break and be right back in a moment. Much more with Senator Ted Cruz.